So for this opening keynote, I would love to welcome Neil Hoyne of Google. Neil is the Chief Measurement Strategist at Google, a senior fellow at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, and the author of Converted, the data-driven way to win customers' hearts, debuting on February 22nd from Penguin Random House. Along with Neil is InfoTrust Chief Growth Officer, co-author of Crawl, Walk, Run, and a great colleague of mine, Michael Loban. Neil and Michael, thank you both so much for starting us off today, and I'll turn it over to you two.
Thank you, Don. Neil, good to see you, my friend.
Hey, Michael, good to see you too. How are you?
Very well. And first of all, congratulations on the book.
Thank you. Thank you. Couple more weeks till it goes out, but it will be great. I kind of joked with you. I joked with the rest of the InfoTrust team. You went through this with the book. Writing was actually easier than publishing. For those of you who've never played around with this, arguing with people that have an intimate knowledge of any of those style guides, you know, those books you threw away in grade school, that is the hardest feat of trying to bring a book to market. Glad it's almost done.
I appreciate the preview. I got the chance to read the book and highly recommend for anyone attending to go on Amazon and pre-buy it, as the book is filled with amazing insights and experiences from your career, and so many anecdotes, stories, and practical examples of how organizations can do better when it comes to digital. So, I was looking at the calendar and I realized that the last time we did the session was in February of 2021. So almost a year have went by. So what are the key things that changed in the e-commerce arena over the past 12 months? What comes to mind?
I mean, I thought, honestly, I thought last time we spoke, I thought we were on the way to returning to normal, right? You have the vaccines rolling out, everything should be back. And generally what I'm observing right now is that e-commerce companies are still trying to figure their way out. Now, not only do they have that whole issue with what's happening with the supply chain, what's happening with inflation, there's also those larger questions to say, what playbook do we follow? And we saw this especially in Q4 of last year, where a lot of companies are saying, well, look, how do we figure out what to price, what to offer, what demand will be, how aggressive we are in marketing versus not? We can't really use 2020. We think we'll be better, but we can't really use 2019. We can't really use 2018. Who are our customers? How do we connect with them? And so I'll encapsulate, and we can unpack these as we go through later on today, but let me give you the three basic buckets. Number one is companies are still struggling to figure out what is their playbook. How are they supposed to engage customers? How aggressive are they supposed to be? What in their mind does normal look like? And oftentimes that's predicated simply by the marketer saying, what are the assumptions that we're using now to drive our business? Do we expect things to go back to normal? Do we expect this shift to e-commerce to continue, which is probably in that second bucket, is that we continue to see e-commerce companies or even general traditional brick and mortar retailers saying this e-commerce buying that we're seeing isn't going to go away. If nothing else, it's just going to continue to accelerate. And so what we're starting to see is they're taking a step back and saying, now that we have a little bit of room to breathe, things are getting a little bit more stable in the market. What did we learn? What does best in class look like? Where are we falling short? Where are there opportunities with all these customers we acquired to do something, new with them in a way? And the third area, and this is something that, for the past 10 plus years I've been at Google, we've pushed on, is we've always pushed on the need to experiment, to move quickly. This has been put into practice to say, if you take companies and you say, what's about to come is uncertain. It really comes down to how quickly can you learn? How quickly can your culture iterate? How quickly can your culture test? And so before, it was generally seen that experimentation was one of those critical components. Every business needed it, but there was really nobody saying there's a penalty if you don't test enough. Now we're actually seeing that. And so the questions for any company is, how quickly can you learn about what the market is sharing with you? How quickly can you take those insights and apply them to businesses? And where you see the separation, and this is what's been remarkable to watch between companies, are the companies that have figured it out versus those that haven't. And oftentimes when you distill it down and you look to say, well, what's different about your customers, about your playbook? It's those companies to say, well, what we've been able to do is maneuver our business so that we can test and we can maneuver. As soon as the market gives us a new signal, as soon as we see something new happening, we're able to take that data and we're able to adjust our course to match the pace of what's happening in the larger market.
Now, one thing that you've mentioned that stood out to me, if I understood you correctly, is it feels like now there's almost like a business penalty when organizations do not experiment well. Can you tell a little bit more? I've not heard that term before in the marketing context, so I'm curious if you can share a little bit more.
I use it deliberately, just from a motivational side. When you say there's a benefit for doing something, that's generally seen as less impactful as a tax, as a penalty. And so I do use that purposely, but let's talk about what happens. Let's even go back to the early lessons of the pandemic. If you go through your inbox and you look at the communications you receive from companies, maybe those that your company sent out, they all kind of blended together. You know, well, what's happening in the market? And we kind of poked fun at this last time we spoke about how every message was really the same. It was, we're all in this together. We're all going to make it through. Call to action, buy our product. And that was just what everybody did because nobody really knew how to maneuver their way out of it. And what some companies do is they said, look, we have to sort this out. We have to figure this out. Let's see how aggressively we can test. And they went out, and what they were able to do was effectively figure out what's the right pulse, what's the right message. When do we want to get in front of travelers, for instance, without being too opportunistic? When do we want to worry about the customers that have left without really giving away too many margins? Like you saw some companies saying, please don't cancel your plans. We'll give you 20, 30% off coupons in the future, which is equivalent to their margins. And you saw other companies saying, look, the only way we're going to get away from this is if we can figure out what does best in class look like in this new reality. And so they started aggressively testing and saying, instead of saying, well, this is the email everybody's sending out, or this is a promotion everyone's running, let's run our own tests to figure out what the truth is for our customer base. And so those companies have effectively had an advantage. They're able to move quickly, and everybody else who's just kind of watching and staying on the sidelines, they're kind of looking for them for guidance to say, well, what are other companies doing with their loyalty programs or their curbside pickup or their online marketing? And let's see what we can do. Let's see if we can follow. And they're really finding themselves several months behind in terms of growth.
So another thing that you mentioned was they almost built a new playbook for winning. So those organizations that did exceptionally well during the pandemic, what do you see as some of the things within their playbook? Right? If the attendees of this program want to learn from those that are best in class, what are 2 or 3 things that you feel organizations have done to or can do to maintain momentum?
Well, we spoke about experimentation. That's kind of a competency, but that's at the core of a playbook. That's something you need to do to build the playbook. It shouldn't be the playbook itself. Biggest area, customer relationships. Now, this sounds a little bit silly because for most companies, you ask about customer relationships and you get the banner. Customers are number one. We love our customers, et cetera. What we really saw was that company said, look, if our previous model was purely transactions, how many products did we sell today? And we saw that disrupted during the pandemic. There were some companies that remained short term and just said, well, if we sold X number of products the day before, let's see if we can get close to X the next day, the next quarter. Other companies took a step back and looked at it more holistically. What happened with our customers? Where did they go? And I like to use travel examples because it's sometimes easier to relate to when we talk about loyalty. But for travelers that were, gold or platinum status on an airline, then all of a sudden their business said, we're no longer allowing you to travel. Now they disappeared. Now for companies that look at transactions, what does that look like? It looks like, well, Neil, Michael, you two aren't traveling. Michael, I think you travel much more than I do. And so they said, well, you're not traveling anymore. Those that were looking at the relationship side took a further step back and said, well, what is happening? Do we believe that Michael's just as loyal? Or do we believe that he's gone forever? And how do we approach that particular customer? And for these customers that are traveling, what's their reason? What are they looking for? And what they started to find was that customers that were acquired before the pandemic, that were high or low lifetime value customers, those relationships were disrupted. And starting about March 2020, new relationships came online. People that, if you segment those two groups out, companies found had very distinct preferences in terms of what they valued, how they wanted to pay, and what was important to them with the companies they were doing business with. So now you have these two distinct segments, and this is what they built their playbook. What do we do with these previous customers? What do we do with these pandemic acquired customers? And they continue to follow that particular style of a playbook forward to say, now that markets return to normal, a little bit more focus on those newly acquired customers during the pandemic. Are they going to stick around? Will their needs change? Do we let them go? Are they worth the investment to save? And then going back and saying, hey, what about all those previous customers? Michael, we haven't seen you in a while. Are you going to come back? And what does that mean in terms of how we approach you, how we market to you? What do we think about our products and our prospects? But the distinctiveness there is that they spent the time understanding the customers and where they fit, instead of just grouping everyone together into a short-term metric to say, what do we do to drive more sales and lower CPAs? They're really adopting this language to say, who are our highest lifetime value customers? And what's the differences we see across those segments?
You mentioned that customer relationship. Every time I hear the term "our customer is number one," or "customer relationship is number one," my immediate response is, well, but let's define what customer segment are we talking about and what type of relationship we want to have with that customer segment. Because otherwise, it becomes just very easy to say, well, we are going to go after everyone and do everything we can to win them and turn them into our customers. And I think history shows that typically that does not work. Organizations end up spending too much money acquiring not even long-term customers, but more transactions that they are not able to retain as long-term customers.
That's exactly it. And I make these silly references in my book. I compare, Michael, as you know, I compare a lot of this, and to everyone out there, I compare it very much to personal relationships. You want to be friends. You want to be nice to everybody. But you also know in your life, you have those friends and family members, those close partners that mean a lot and are going to contribute a lot of value to your life and who you are. And then there's the Uber driver that brought you back from the airport. You can have a great conversation, nice friend, but you know, you're not going to call up when you have like an opinion to be like, what should I do next in my life? What should I invest in? You may call your friend, your family, your business partner. You may call your really great customers that are going to spend a lot. You're not going to call up the Uber driver and be like, yeah, you think I should move to Colorado or Texas? That's what everyone in California does now. You don't do it because they don't have that place. And it's the same with your customers. Some are going to be worth a lot. Oftentimes we just use this rule, 20% of your customers driving 80% of the value. What happens if you average that? Right, Michael? What if you say everyone's equal? You end up spending far too little on the relationships that matter and far too much on the ones that don't.
So you've mentioned a couple of times LTV, a term that we discuss the importance of measuring LTV quite a bit, and you spend some time in the book also talking about customer lifetime value analysis and the importance of knowing who are the highest, the clients that you have that have highest customer lifetime value. But the question is, what do you do with the data over the past 2 years? Because if we do the analysis incorporating data from 2020 and 2021, for some it might look, I don't know, is the term wonky or strange or unusual, right? Yeah. Crazy. So how do we think about this?
So the general practices and people, when we just talk about numbers in general, some people sit on that line to say, you always include the data. The data is what it is. And unfortunately, you see a lot of companies will be like, we're going to deem this an outlier and just exclude it. The importance, though, and the differentiation is fairly simple. Just segment your customers. If you group everyone together, it's going to be harder to pick up those nuances of those customers that were acquired during the pandemic. When I look at a company holistically, I say you include all the data that's available because you're still going to be in a better position than if you believe that everything was just like it was in 2018 or 2019. You include that data. But just when you're segmenting your data and you're looking at your customer preferences, don't keep all those customers in that big pot. Segment them out and look at how those differences are for customers acquired from March 2020 versus customers acquired previously. And what you're going to start to see are some of those trends that we discussed. You're going to see some of those earlier acquired customers behaving a little bit differently. But now here's the continuity. Here's what's really remarkable that we're starting to see. Now that markets are starting to recover, people are getting vaccinated, people are going back to work, people are resuming their normal lives as much as that's possible. We're seeing that those customers that were still high lifetime value in 2019 and early 2020, before this all started, when we look at how valuable they are to the businesses today, the specific amount may be different, but we're still seeing that they're high value customers in the future. And so those relationships still persist. And in fact, one of the largest studies that I've seen looked at lifetime value over 30 years. 30 years, a lot of disruption, a lot of products came out, a lot of different trends. The internet came out. And still, when we look at those behaviors, those customers continue to behave how they were expected, which shows to the strength of these models that we advocate for, that I know your team uses, in just understanding who these customers are. So the answer is keep that data, but just be aware that you shouldn't pile all customers together. Segment them by the dates they were acquired, and you're going to see different attributes and different behaviors from those segments. But you need to have the infrastructure, you need to have the tools in place to actually do it.
So would the practical exercise be to look at our customer data, those customers that perhaps had high customer lifetime value before pandemic, let's say before 2020, and say how many of those perhaps over the past year or 2 years have not shopped with us? Right? For whatever reason, during this time, they dropped off. Is now an opportunity for us to figure out, well, maybe this is a time for us to re-engage. Maybe, to your point, they're not gone forever. Something happened. But now let's try to go back and reestablish that relationship, because there was something very special about that group of customers and the relationship that we had with them.
That's exactly it. And it can be more than just sales. Any data that you can collect about their behaviors, about their habits, what they're waiting for, will be instructive in terms of how aggressive you should be. You know, for instance, maybe you have some people that are not willing, and again, going back to that travel example, just because it carries forward, that aren't ready to travel just yet. Now, part of the reason why I don't travel, I have held status on 2 airlines. I haven't traveled because Google has not really returned to office yet. And so we're not traveling anywhere. And so that's my reason. So you need to hold on a little bit longer until I'm actually going to come back. And then you're likely going to see my travel patterns resume as they were before, at least relative to other customers. I'll spend more than others will. But you need to understand that. And so really what we're saying here is the first step is really to understand who your customers are and how they're behaving. The second step is to indulge a little bit of your curiosity and ask them why. You know, don't just assume that these people are gone forever, that they need X or Y from your business, but to go out and actually collect more data about what's driving their behavior. And again, just as we talked about with lifetime value, the importance of segmentation. Don't go to all your customers and say, what are you thinking? But pick out and segment those customers and say, what are the needs of the high lifetime value customers? Those customers we haven't seen in a couple, 18, 24 months. What do they need? When are they going to come back? And let's keep a close eye on them. And maybe for those customers that left, we don't care as much about them. We can still collect the data, but they're not going to contribute a lot of value, even if we were to win them back.
One thing that you've mentioned that I took a note of, I think it's a very powerful question. What are they waiting for? And I think as part of any retention strategy, when we are trying to determine why a certain segment of customers maybe is not buying from us anymore, is to ask ourselves that, right? What are they waiting for? Whether in our organization, what has to change for them to come back, or perhaps in the environment, what are the things that need to change before they're able to come back? But just to be mindful of that, I think can be quite valuable for organizations.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not only understanding that, but also, again, this is where that theme of segmentation continues to carry forward. When we look at companies and we go back to that concept of a playbook, some companies are approaching this idea of customer re-engagement retention as a very blunt instrument. Let's do this for everybody. You shouldn't. You really need to understand the responsiveness to individual groups to the promotions that you're trying to offer. Again, if a company wants to come back and be like, look, Neil, we will give you this if you come back. If it's a really good incentive, I may come back just to take advantage of that promotion or that offer. But that's really not the behavior you're trying to drive. You're trying to drive better growth, better profitability. And so across these different segments, you want to understand not only what's holding them back, but what's the appropriate promotion and what's the appropriate timing to re-engage those segments. Otherwise, you worry that in a year, 2 years from now, what we're going to be talking about is how a lot of companies ended up giving margin during this point of recovery because they were just so anxious to get these customers re-engaged to check that box. And so they ended up being a little bit more aggressive than they should have in what they were giving away.
So let's dive in a little bit more into this idea of the first-party data collection and the value exchange. Yeah. I think by this point, it's safe to say that all of us have seen a pop-up banner or two that says, if you continue and buy from us today, we're going to give you 20% off, or we are going to give you another type of discount. And to your point, right, I typically don't shy away from using those, even they're advantageous. But I do wonder, I'm likely buying some of the stuff just because of a very steep discount that I'm getting, and chances are I will not come back at the regular price, right? So I'm not the type of customer that they actually want long term. So what are the right questions to ask, and maybe what is the right time to ask those questions to get that first party data and not overwhelm your users. And again, focus on getting information, not just to generate one-time transaction, but to start that relationship, to start that conversation.
All right, so here's confession time for you, Michael. For at least one of the companies that's on this call, I have at least 30 different identifiers, because every time I come to your site, you give me that, like that pop-up you described, it says, give us an email address and we will give you 20% off. I have a new email address every time I go to the site because it's worth that. Pro tip, you add a + into Gmail, you can create more email addresses. It's great. And if that's what it takes, then I'm happy to do it. Why wouldn't I?
Sure.
So when we look at that, what it really is it's not necessarily that companies are making a huge mistake. I think that is, but I think the precursor to that is simply what they incentivize. A lot of companies will incentivize new customer growth at all costs. And that's measured in their systems by how many new customer accounts were created, how many more email addresses were obtained. And it almost starts a vicious cycle. And this is unfortunately the reality for a lot of retailers, is that there's not a great incentive for retailers to look into their own data to find out if this is happening. So if you're in charge of an acquisition campaign at a retailer, and this has been the practice of your customers, do you really want to go back to the organization, raise your hand and say, so out of the customer numbers we thought we acquired, it was actually 60% less, maybe more. And so companies aren't looking at it. Now, so how do you make that transition? Do you not simply collect emails? Do you not use that as a metric? This is where new customer acquisition and lifetime value play hand in hand. If you're acquiring a whole bunch of customers, but these customers are only one-time purchasers, they're not going to come back, they're not going to spend, they're only going to use that coupon and buy things on discount. Lifetime value is the only way you're going to pull that out. And so equally, if you're bringing in really great customers through promotion, the same thing happens. And this is why it's such a powerful metric, is that you're saying, we're going to look beyond a single metric and we're going to look a little bit further. So that's part number one. This is where these things start to come together, is that now you have a way to really pressure test, whether it's people following you on social media or signing up for email on your site, or simply people you were acquiring from, say, affiliate or paid search campaigns. Now you at least have a diagnostic guide. I don't care if you're bidding on it or not, but now you have a guide in your dashboard to say, are these customers ever going to come back? And if they are, why? If they're not, why not? Now that's the first part of the first party data, but there's a larger story here with first party data, which is not only this intersection of customer data, but what we see happening in privacy. Now there's a lot of ways we can explain it. I can give you an alphabet soup of CCPA and CPRA, and there's legislation in Virginia and Colorado here in the States, everything that's going to change the way we interact with that first party data. But I want to simplify it down the best that I can. What we're really seeing with first party data is that customers are asking for a different exchange. They're saying they want to change the terms of the deal they have with retailers. They're saying in the past, companies have just vacuumed up as much information, trading it amongst themselves and third parties, not necessarily being clear about where that data is going or how they're using it, and unfortunately, in times, losing control over that data. Now, customers went actually, and Salesforce did a great survey on that, where they found that nearly 70% of customers were actually willing to share more data with companies, even given these circumstances, but they're asking for something different. They're asking for three things. One is transparency. What are you capturing? What are you doing with that data? Just have to tell them. Second one, control. If I decide to go my separate ways, can I have my data back? If I don't like what you're doing with my data, can you delete it? Or if you get something wrong, can you change it? And so the third thing that they want to know is they want to know what's in it for them. What's the value that they get by you having their data? So oftentimes these vague things, we'll help you personalize our products and services. We'll be able to surface better recommendations. Those are not cutting it for companies anymore, because consumers are asking more questions. If you really want this information, if you want to give it to me, I want to see how the experience is being improved. I want to see what these products and services you're building, how is our relationship strengthened? You know, it's kind of like if I ask you a question, Michael, if I'm like, hey, Michael, are you going skiing this weekend? You're like, no, I mean, you're in Ohio. Maybe you could travel somewhere and go skiing. But then your next question will be, why do you want to know? And if I just say, oh, no, just curious, that seems a little bit suspicious, but that's what a lot of retailers do. It's like, give us all your information. What are you doing with it? No, don't worry. We'll tell you next time. That has to change. Now, a lot of companies, admittedly, haven't figured this out. So the first playbook we're really dealing with is a pandemic playbook, what we do with these customers. The second one is this first-party data playbook, which is to say, as a retailer, how do you incentivize customers to share information with you? What's the value in it for them? How do you message it to those consumers? What's the right time? What's the right method? What pieces of data do you need? What do you need to give back? And how does this differ just as lifetime value across different audience segments? Everyone's going to have different motivations for where they want to share data. And a lot of these questions are uncertain, but in first-party data, these are the questions that need to be asked. Because a lot of companies are just following, the language of the law. This is exactly what we need to provide. We can't copy this. We can't share that. The more proactive companies, the ones that are market leading, are ones that are saying, we need to figure out today, if we're getting an email address from somebody, if we're giving them a coupon, if we're asking them to tell us more about other companies and competitors they shop with, how are we improving the experience and the relationship we have with them?
And to highlight three things that you mentioned, again, transparency, control, and value exchange. And I think value exchange, when I think about it personally, it's the promise of the value exchange and then the delivery of that value exchange. And what I mean by that, I tend to shop with one retailer and reading their policy of why they collect certain information about me. It always states, collect this information to personalize and make your online shopping experience better. Something along those lines. And out of curiosity, I started visiting that website every week just to see what are they actually personalizing. And I started to notice nothing actually changed. So they keep promising this, but then I do not have a single node of evidence that this is actually what's happening. And I suspect a lot of times that's, not a lot of times, but at times that's the case, right? The promises, because organizations want to believe that at some point they will be able to do this type of personalization, they'll be able to do deliver this type of experience that our customers actually want. But because it doesn't always happen, customers tend to lose maybe faith, or the wait time is over. It's like, well, you've been promising to make my experience better now for a year, and I still look at the same homepage as the person next to me. So are you really delivering on that value exchange?
Most companies, Michael, that's a great example. Most companies are not. I mean, honestly, I would be happy if I saw a company that's like, look, we're going to collect this personal data from you simply because we want to sell you more shit. Like, at least you're being honest with me. You're telling me what you're doing with that data. But I appreciate that, because companies need to have this honest confrontation online. Go through, and seriously, internally, you don't need to mention this to your customers. Go through this data line by line that you're capturing and saying, how are we improving the relationship we have with our customers that's not directly related to selling? Now, of course, companies are going to sit there and say, we're in the business of selling. This is how we grow. We need to sell products. We can't get anywhere by feeling good or bad. And now you start to see the intersection about everything we were talking about previously, is that when companies start focusing on customer lifetime value, they start focusing on that longer relationship. They can say, we can use this data to better support our customers' needs in the future. So if they have problems, we know how to treat them. We know how to be more proactive. They can start investing in other parts to say, they're not willing to buy yet. We don't expect them to buy, but here's how we can nurture that relationship that they've built with our firm. And it all happens because companies stop thinking short term. If you're thinking only short term, if you're thinking only transaction, both in COVID, both with first party data, both with privacy, you limit the number of options that you have, because really you say, we can only do one thing at this moment. What is the highest priority for our firm? It's to sell, get them to buy. And so that data is used, claiming to personalize, but it's used to sell. When companies start looking more long term and they say, we want to strengthen this relationship so that these customers buy more, they buy more often, they stick around with us longer, then all of a sudden you have more opportunities for what you can do to take that data and apply it. And that's what consumers are asking for. They're saying, I want to have a relationship with you. I want to give you more data. But just tell me that you're going to do something that's strengthening our relationship, that makes me feel better about your brand. Then here's the next product I should buy.
Which goes back to your point of system of rewards. A system of rewards for me personally is something I started using maybe over the past just couple of years. One of my colleagues, who is our chief operating officer, he often says, well, if you want to achieve this type of pattern or this type of behavior, what is the system of reward? And I think it very much applies here, right? When we simply say, well, we want to sell, or we want to generate X number of transactions over Black Friday or whatever the holiday might be, right? Well, if those are the actions that will be rewarded, that might not actually end up bringing you long-term customers. So thinking holistically and making sure that the whole organization works in tune to same system of rewards, to the same priorities, sounds to be like a very important thing to execute.
Just even having that awareness in your organization, Michael, is a powerful tool. Because you may be sitting there being like, well, what is that right value exchange? What do I need to provide them? Is it coupons? Is it promotional offers? Is it sales? Where we are right now in retail is these are the early days. This is the infancy of it, where companies are starting to explore, which means simply asking that question, starting to understand what your customers perceive as value is enough. Remember, the goal here is not to be perfect. That's going to take years, decades to figure out exactly what consumers want and what that balance is. But you just need to be better than the companies you're competing with. You need to be able to build more of that trust, more of that transparency, so they share and feel comfortable sharing more of that data with you, and you have more signals to act on than the competitors, the people that you're bidding against in the auction. And so it's not a perfect answer, but I guess a lot of these messages that we're talking about really is just getting started, doing something to improve your learnings with this idea of being, this is where the market is headed, and at least what you should focus on.
And I think for many things that we're discussing today, and especially the next fun topic, it's often not about having the perfect answer, because we might not know what the answer might be, but it's consistent process of finding it out.
Yes. Yes. And just making sure that that process, again, is better than your competitors. What's that? That one story. It's like, you don't have to be able to outrun a bear. You just need to be able to outrun your friend who's also running from the bear. You know, it's the same thing. You just need to be a little bit quicker. And I hope that takes a little bit of pressure off all of you, because where I sit right now and I look at the market, you know, companies are moving in this direction, but by far a majority of them are looking at first party data, are looking at privacy as purely a legal concern. Legal, tell me what I can capture and what I can't capture. Tell me what I have to put on the bottom of my page. I encourage you to take a step back and think more holistically to say, how do you build a plan for really understanding what your customers want? That transparency, that control, and that value.
So let's talk a little bit about that. We touched on CCPA, GDPR, all of the regulations that are happening in the United States, and quite a bit that's happening around the world. There's typically something in the news almost on a daily basis. How should retailers be ready or get prepared to the next phase of this privacy-centric marketing landscape?
You know, we spoke about some of the larger themes around what companies should think about, at least from the C-suite, from the executive level. Most practically is that companies need to put some type of assessment in place. And we're just talking about the nuts and bolts of privacy, some type of assessment that gives you a sense as to where you sit. What data points are at risk? Where are there opportunities? Where are there biases? How will these changes affect your system? And the reason why I like the idea of putting together a comprehensive plan and actually engaging on that more than individual piecemeal is because then you actually feel like you have a better sense of control around the problem. All too often we see companies say, well, Apple changed this or Google changed that, or this state is changing this. And they approach it, they form a small group and they just approach that one problem. And generally what we see is companies that build a more holistic assessment to understand how all their systems are coming together. They feel better prepared that when additional changes come up, that they've already done the research to know where it's going to poke and where systems are going to bend and break. And so I'd like to see more of that in the market, to be honest, of companies that had a more comprehensive understanding as to how all these things come together and how it's going to impact their business, than simply being very active. To your point, every day there's a new news story and we start to think, well, what does this change?
Thank you. In light of all of the changes that we've been discussing today, are there any organizations, if somebody is looking for what best in class looks like, any organizations that come to mind for you and why?
You know, it's hard because there are a few companies that come to mind, but they kind of look at this kind of stuff as their secret sauce. Okay. Right? They want to be ahead of the market. They don't want to wave their hand and be like, everybody come follow us. This is the secret to our greatness. But I'll give you a sense as to what to look out for. Number one is start with your experience as a consumer. When you're going and engaging with these sites, and going back, Michael, to that example you gave, where you start to see these nebulous messages, you also will pay attention to those that you see doing a slightly better job. When you look at iOS devices that have that ugly opt-in screen, if you have an iPhone where it says, do you want to share data with this company? And that's all you get, versus some that try to give you messages beforehand to say, we really want to earn your trust. Here's how we're going to connect and use that data. When you request your data from companies, and I encourage you to do this as well, look at differences in their process. Can they actually identify you as a consumer through a single identifier, or do they need you to give you 10 different pieces of information so they can try to figure out who you are? You start to see separation between those best and worst class. Those are the companies I really look towards. I look towards the companies just through my normal experiences as a consumer to say, who do I think is earning my trust? Do I feel comfortable sharing more data with? And that really understands more about me than a single transaction.
Since you mentioned single transaction and again, going to that consumer understanding, before we wrap things up in a couple of minutes, there were a couple of questions from the audience. And
Sure.
One was around the organization that is not currently using LTV, or as they're phrasing it, they're not an LTV organization. How do you recommend they get started?
So the basic thing is, with calculating LTV, acknowledge that it's a lot easier than what most companies believe. They believe it's a large machine learning exercise where all the data needs to be clean and integrated. A lot of the models that have been popularized right now simply require transaction date, transaction amount, and some way to join together transactions by the same person. So it's really, if you think about it as a spreadsheet, which it is, 3 columns of data. Now, once you think about that, and you can either calculate it internally or externally, the project end to end, some companies have done it in under a week. And so the very first thing is to admit to yourself, you can calculate what's considered a best-in-class model. It doesn't require a lot of data. It just requires the right direction to go. And Michael, we can certainly share some links as to how to do this effectively.
Absolutely.
But it is achievable. And then once you have that in place, remember, your goal is not to transform the entire organization. It's simply to get an understanding as to what's happening. How many great customers do you have versus ones that are going to spend a lot less? Where are they acquired from? What do they buy? Do they use coupon codes? What are their behaviors? Now, there's no set list of questions you have to go through, but this is part of the exploration that you can start with your company. Simply by having that metric in hand, you don't need to change how you're bidding or how you're investing. You simply need to be able to provoke the conversation in organizations to say, if we are acquiring these customers, how valuable are they? If we're running this promotion, who are the customers that are responding? Just that lens, we found over time, is enough to move companies in that direction, because even if they're bidding to acquisitions or they're bidding to individual conversions, and they start to see that number to say, hey, how come those customers from that channel are coming back and that channel are not? Then all of a sudden that company is moving in the right direction. I think the best way that I've heard it, when we talk about lifetime values, not only calculating, but recognizing that you're not fitting your business to lifetime value. Your business has been successful because of everything you've done. You don't want to give those up. Instead, you just want to figure out how can you fit this lifetime value, this new view of the customer, into your current processes. And hopefully it takes a little bit of weight off your shoulders.
And one thing that I might also add, most likely, whoever the attendee is, as you hear other presenters speak, there will be something where you might say, well, we are not an LTV organization, or we are not a testing organization. Maybe we are not an organization that does forecasting yet, right? The easiest thing to do, well, start with one analysis, start with one test. It's a lot of times, somebody who does not enjoy endurance running or long distance running like I do might ask me, how do I get started with marathon running? Well, just go for 1 mile run outside. And that's it, and see how it goes, right?
Yeah.
So I think here is, a lot of times we want to say, well, we need to be best in class, and we need to do it before the end of the quarter. That might be challenging, not impossible, but might be challenging. So start building an appetite, start with small experiments, start with analysis, and see what that first customer lifetime value project will bring you, right? What are some of the things that you did not know before or were not aware of might showcase? And that's a good start.
That's exactly it. And for every company that I meet with, when you're looking at the definition of a company that is data-driven or a customer lifetime value-centric company, it's never 100%. It never is. We're only human. But when you look at companies, you'll be like, they are more data-driven than the people they're competing with. They are more data-driven because they did that 1 mile run while everyone else is thinking about it, planning out their perfect path to running a marathon and not executing. And that's kind of the importance about taking that step, about moving iteratively and confidently to say, just that movement, just those small actions can lead to disproportionately large benefits for your organization. And I'm sure your health, I guess running a mile is healthy. It seems like it.
Absolutely. I think it's about 5% improvements, right? Where can I make a 5% improvement? Maybe it's, again, CLV analysis. Maybe it's running yet another test or experiment. Maybe it's understanding what the value exchange is with my consumer, right? All the headlines are filled with digital transformation, right? Or how to create the next digital transformation within the organization. But transformation is, to me, it seems like merely is the result of 5% improvements that you continuously make across your organization. That makes or helps you accomplish transformational results.
That's all it is. And it's strange that I can't overstate this, that for as simple as it is, and people be doubtful, be like, can it be that simple? Can it be that easy? It's that sense of disbelief that keeps companies from doing it. No, it can't be that easy. It must be an 18-month plan. Can't do the 5% improvement. And they leave those opportunities on the table just for the companies that have the awareness and the discipline to execute on it. And all of those add up. And then you see that separation across other companies are saying, hey, how come those people are so far ahead? It wasn't because they went from 0 to 100. It was because every day they just took a couple more steps. They ran one more mile.
Well, to wrap things up as we are approaching our time, I'm going to borrow Tim Ferriss's question, the one that he uses very often on his podcast. What is your ask of our audience? What would you like them to do in 2022?
Something, anything. No, it sounds generic. It sounds generic. We've talked about a lot of these. What I'd say is get a better understanding of your customers. Now, that can exist because you're going to organize and get your data integrated. You're going to calculate customer lifetime value. You're going to understand the value that they want for sharing that data. But just set that simple goal for yourself. And then the second part of it, which we just spoke about, which is required for executing, is challenge yourself every week, every month, just to be slightly better. So that way you can say, look, you're not going to change the world. You're not going to transform the organization overnight. But just when you look at it and you say, all right, at the end of next week, if we regroup together, or you reach out to me on LinkedIn or wherever, and you say, I want to know what that thing you did in your organization just to make yourself 1% better. And you may not think it was much, but if you challenge yourself to continually do that, you will be surprised as to how far you're able to take your organization in the future.
Neil, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Of course.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Michael. And thank you so much, Neil. Neil, it's really good to hear that I'm not the only one that creates 30 email addresses to get the best deal. So thank you so much for sharing that. Once again, Neil Hoyne's Converted, the data-driven way to win customers' hearts, will be debuting on February 22nd from Penguin Random House. Thank you both again so much.